Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar on securing enterprise data at rest and in motion. I want to thank the Share team for inviting us to present to their audience today. We appreciate the opportunity to share this information. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. All you need to do is use the chat box to enter your question, and then we will read those out at the end and try to answer as many as possible. Here's our agenda for the next hour. It will consist of a brief review of some of the business drivers surrounding the need for securing data. We'll also provide a high-level, sort of an Encryption 101 review, and then drill down into the options for securing data. Think of it as an onion that we'll be peeling during the session today. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we'll end with a summary and take questions. I'd like to introduce our team to you. Colin Ross joins us today as our Senior Systems Engineer. He's been at SDS for just about 6 years, I believe, having come to us as a customer himself, a network systems programmer for a large bank, where he was responsible for network management tools and security solutions. He implemented IP, EE, SNA in their network. Tim Full is joining us as well. He's our Technical Services Manager here at SDS. He's been with us for over 20 years and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience as it relates to security solutions. He will be discussing the Encryption 101, so everything from PGP and how things are encrypted, decrypted, and some of the details along those lines. And I'm Deb Hodson. I'm the sales manager here at SDS, just coming up on 5 years with the company. But I've been in the business for over 25 years, starting my career at IBM, then Candle, the Omegamon company, and several years at Hewlett-Packard. All right, so what are the business motivators, or what's driving companies to take a serious look at protecting their data? You're probably aware of some of the compliance measures that have been introduced over the years. The payment card industry data security standard, PCI DSS for an example, is a set of requirements designed to ensure that all companies that process, store, or transmit credit card information maintain a secure environment. And PCI applies to all organizations or merchants, regardless of size or number of transactions. It's all about accepting, transmitting, and storing any card holder data. And then depending upon which industry you all are in, a different set of compliance standards may apply to you, like HIPAA, HITECH, FFIEC. Your trading partners may also be the reason why you need to ensure that your files are encrypted during transmission. Corporate security policies require encryption of valuable company information as well as valuable customer information. I thought it would be helpful. I'm just going to take a few slides from a recent 2013 Ponemon Institute research report that I thought you might all find interesting. This figure shows the average size of data breaches for organizations in the 9 countries represented in this research study. At an average of about 34,000, Australia has the highest number of breached records. Our sample here from Ponemon shows that Japanese organizations, on the other hand, experience the lowest average number of breached records at about 18,000. By design, the data breach cases included in this particular research study had a minimum value of 1,000 records and a maximum value of 100,000 records. So that wasn't included the data breach cases that were in excess of 100,000 records, because that would have affected the findings and not really a true representation of the data breaches most companies experience. This figure shows the average organizational cost of data breach, and of course it's the same 9 countries. So what you can see here is that the U.S. sample experienced the highest total average cost at more than $5.4 million, followed by Germany at $4.8 million. In sharp contrast, samples of Brazilian and Indian companies experienced the lowest total average cost at about $1.3 million and $1.1 million, respectively. What you can see here is that this particular figure shows what portion of the root cause comes from malicious or criminal attacks versus system glitches or the human factor. So about 37% of incidents involved a malicious or criminal attack. 35% concerned a negligent employee or contractor, so that's the human factor piece. And then 29% involved system glitches that included both IT and business process failures. Well, I hope this has given you just a pretty good idea of what's going on in the marketplace, some of the business drivers and motivations for securing data. And I think it's always good to have a current research study to go through some of the statistics. And please feel free to go look at the 2013 Ponemon Institute research report. There's a lot of good data in it. What I'm going to do now is hand it over to Tim Full. He's going to be discussing really Encryption 101. Tim?
Thank you, Deb. My goal is to briefly discuss some basic concepts of what encryption is and to familiarize you a bit with some of the terms and acronyms that will be used as you work with encryption. So what usually is implied when encryption requirements are introduced? The first thing that always comes to mind is that there are certain bits of data that aren't really in your best interest to make publicly available. Intellectual property, payroll information, health records, financials, etc. are necessary data that need to be tracked and archived for those that have a vested interest in your good, but it isn't information that you really just want out there for whoever happens upon it. Okay, I think we're pretty familiar with that idea, but there are some other aspects that may or may not be obvious to all of you. Knowing that the information is a duplicate of what the original was is necessary. Having access to data that may not be accurate isn't much better than not having the data at all. Part of a good encryption scheme will provide mechanisms to ensure the data is accurate. In many ways, knowing that the source of the original data is as important, if not more so, than being confident that the data is accurate. First, you need to know that the info received came from a person you expected and was not tampered with by a man in the middle. Second, it may be necessary that you can prove that the information you receive cannot be denied at some later time by the originator. This same mechanism used to ensure the integrity has some additional features that eliminate the deniability of the data. Finally, there are some other valuable side effects when using an encryption scheme, such as data compression, which can save bandwidth and disk space while making encrypted data even more protected. Let's get into some more details of how encryption provides these facilities. I'm going to start by shuffling the order a bit. I'm going to talk about how data integrity is ensured, and as its concepts are fundamental to some of the other points. If you've worked with computers for long, you've probably heard of or are familiar with checksums. A checksum is just a process to help identify when data has been changed somewhere along the way. It can be as simple as sending a sum of a list of numbers along with the list itself. If the sum doesn't match up at the other end, you would know the data is not accurate. Basic checksums are helpful, but can be easily overcome. Checksums can help to identify when data is bad, but they can be fooled into thinking the data is good when it isn't. What we really need is a super checksum. The name generally used for these super checksums is a message digest. Message digests are sometimes called fingerprints. The basic idea is to be able to take a file of any size and provide a standard process that will create a fingerprint of a set length that will not be easily fooled by offsetting errors. One of the oldest of these is an MD5 sum. An MD5 sum uses a calculation a bit more complicated than just summing up a list in order to generate a 128-bit data stream. When the same data is passed through the same algorithm, the same 120-bit data stream should be the result. If, however, a bit or two get changed or swap positions, the fingerprint should reflect even a minute change. MD5 did work well, but hackers are clever people. Fortunately, there are clever people trying to inhibit their attempts. It was identified that even though it is not easy, a change to the data, if properly placed, could cause a duplicate MD5 sum, opening the door for a hacker to modify the data to their liking. MD5 is still useful, but for integrity, the algorithm is considered broken, so it should be used with caution. A newer algorithm was introduced that made the duplication even more difficult. First, the calculation reduced the possibility of duplications, and also it created a bigger 160-bit fingerprint to make it even harder to cause the duplication to occur. This algorithm was created by the NSA. They called it the Secure Hash Algorithm, or SHA-1. SHA-1 is much more secure than MD5, but it has also been shown to be breakable. So in 2001, SHA-2 was introduced and is currently considered to be secure. It provides even larger keys that makes duplication even less likely. There is an SHA-3 algorithm being worked on, but it is not widely used at this time. Okay, so let's talk about what we usually think of what encryption is. First, we're going to talk about symmetric ciphers, which are based on what you may have played with as a child. Caesar gets some credit for an early cipher that was super basic. Let's say you want to take a word like fish and encrypt it. What Caesar did was to change each letter to the character 3 letters later in the alphabet. So in fish, if I took the F, took the letter 3 characters later, so F, G, H, I, F becomes I. I would become L, S would become V, and H becomes K. So when the data was encrypted, FISH would become ISVK. So if you know the secret, or actually if you can break the secret, it's pretty easy to reverse the process. Obviously, this rudimentary cipher would not be very secure. Symmetric encryption is based on the fact that both parties share a secret that can be used on both ends. The trick is to get that secret to be shared in a safe manner so an eavesdropper can't also learn it and decrypt the data. Lots of tricks are employed to make the data difficult to decipher, but they all start with a shared secret. There are processes used such as DES or AES that are well known, but the trick is to share the starting point to decipher the data through those processes. The starting point is called a session key. If you have the session key and know which well-known algorithm is used to encrypt the data, you can decrypt the data. The process is pretty straightforward, and even with the tricks used to make it more complicated, symmetric encryption is still very fast. I've listed some of the well-known algorithms for symmetric encryption, so when you hear these, you can relate them to this fast process. DES, by the way, is considered insecure. 3DES, or more commonly known as triple DES, actually uses the DES algorithm, but the data is first encrypted with one key, then it's decrypted with a second key, which actually is, when it's decrypted, creates a gibberish data stream. Then finally it's re-encrypted with a third key. Now if you reverse that process, you'd end up back with the original unencrypted data. This is much better than just DES was, but it is also falling out of favor. AES is probably the most commonly used algorithm at this point. The other algorithms that I listed also have advantages, but we don't really have the time to go into any detail with them. Next, we're going to talk a bit about asymmetric encryption. Asymmetric encryption is interesting in that the process of encrypting the data is done with one key, and the decrypting of the data can only be done with a second key that has a mathematical relationship to the first, but is different. If you only have one of the keys, it's practically impossible to determine what its counterpart is. This relationship between the keys provides some very interesting possibilities. The two keys are called a public-private key pair. The public key is exactly what the title represents. You can use it for easy, carefree distribution to your partners. Anyone can have the public key. The private key, on the other hand, also is exactly as the title indicates. It's your private key, and it shouldn't be shared with anyone. If someone were to get access to your private key, not only would they be able to decrypt data that was meant for your eyes only, but they could also impersonate you and cause you a world of hurt. We'll discuss that a bit later when we talk about signatures. I also want to mention that asymmetric encryption is really great, but it comes at a significant cost. It takes approximately 1,000 times more CPU power to use asymmetric keys than symmetric keys. There is a solution, though, that allows us to take advantage of the strengths of both of these technologies while minimizing their downsides. A hybrid model can be used. We'll go into some more detail on that later on. Although asymmetric encryption can be used to encrypt payload, if the volume of the data is at all significant, this can be quite expensive. As part of our hybrid model, asymmetric encryption is most commonly used to encrypt the symmetric key to be sent to your partner. Some terms you may see relating to algorithms relating to asymmetric keys are Diffie-Hellman, RSA, and LGML. And you may also see DSA, which is an asymmetric algorithm, but it's used only for signing, but not for encrypting data. So let's talk a little bit about the signature, which I mentioned a bit earlier. A signature takes the message digest of the original data and encrypts it with your private key. Optionally, the signature can also contain a certificate from a trusted authority to validate that the public key you've provided to your partner is actually owned by you. These certificates can be managed in-house, but if sharing data externally, might be created by companies such as VeriSign, GeoTrust, GoDaddy, etc. that are trusted by many organizations. PGP also provides a different self-management model for certificate validation called a web of trust. In the web of trust, the onus of validation is left to the user to make sure that the fingerprint of a certificate matches what your partner tells you it should be using some other method. They should share that information with you face-to-face, over the phone, or whatever method you might feel is secure. If you feel comfortable that the certificate is valid, you can mark it as such, so the next time you receive info that contains that same certificate, you'll automatically trust it. In addition, the web of trust can also allow you to trust the fact that some of your friends trust the certificate. Okay, let's talk about non-repudiation of origin. Whoa, what does that mean? Well, in a nutshell, it allows someone to hold another, such as the originator of the content, to be liable for that content. First, since the message digest was encrypted with the originator's private key, it can only be decrypted with his public key. Therefore, if the message digest of the final data matches the message digest that was decrypted with the originator's public key, you can know that it was him that encrypted the message digest, since it was his public key that was able to decrypt it. And second, you can know that the data you received was the data they sent, since those two message digests match. The data is accurate, and it was sent by him. Makes it a little harder to squirm out of it. One other feature that I want to briefly discuss is compression, and how it's actually important in relation to encryption. Obviously, compression will use less bandwidth and transfer in disk space at its destinations, but there's another factor. If you compress the data before encrypting it, the data itself, due to the compression, is much more random in nature, so the encryption becomes even more difficult to break. The only downside to compression is the CPU needed to compress the data, but the upside is that you gain some of that CPU back when you are encrypting a smaller compressed file. Okay, so let's put this all together. We're going to use several of these techniques and see how they all fit. So, first of all, we have some data that we want to send to someone. We're going to compress the data to reduce the footprint and to make the data more random in nature for the encryption purposes. Second, we'll generate a random session key that is used for compressing the data. The key is the shared secret to kick off the data encryption process. Symmetric data is fast, so we can encrypt a lot more data very quickly that way. Third, we'll encrypt the session key using the public key of our intended recipient. Actually, if you want to send the data to multiple people, let's say 3 people, you will use the same symmetrically encrypted payload, but attach the session key 3 times to the file so that each of the 3 people can decrypt their version of the session key using their own private key. Finally, you apply a signature using your private key so that the user knows it came from you and that the data received is what you'd sent. By the way, I should note that it's possible to sign data without encrypting the payload. This can be useful when the goal is not so much that you want to protect the data, but that you want to let the person know that you were the originator and that the data received is in fact accurate. To do this, all that needs to be done is to generate the message digest of the data, encrypt the signature, which includes the message digest and your certificate if optionally, with your private key, and then you attach that to the clear text. Then when the user receives the data, they can get a message digest of that clear text and validate it against the signature that you'd sent them to make sure that it is accurate and that it came from you. Since this is Share, I want to talk briefly about some ZOS-specific encryption topics. As we discussed earlier, session keys for symmetric processing are usually randomly generated, but the public-private key pairs necessary to access the session key need to be available. Depending upon your needs for security, there are 3 models dealing with your private key that have their pluses and minuses. Clear key has the least overhead, but has the most risk of exposure. If you are only concerned about casual hackers, you might be able to gain from some performance improvements, but your private key is going to be more exposed to possible interception. For example, if a dump of your address space were taken, the clear key will be available in that dump for extraction. Now, if you really do have some serious security concerns, you may want to consider using a secret key instead. It gives you the highest level of security. But it does require a crypto coprocessor, which is available for an additional cost. The crypto coprocessor is a tamper-proof card, so if someone were to steal the physical card with the hopes of extracting your keys, they still would have a lot of difficulty in retrieving those private keys. The way it works is that there is a master key stored in the card itself, and that master key is used to encrypt the private keys. And then the private keys can be then stored and managed by the ICSF software tool, which we'll discuss a bit more in a moment. So secret keys, well, are super secret, but there is a cost involved. There's also a protected key model that is a hybrid of the clear key model and the secret key model. When an LPAR is IPL'd, a wrapping key, similar to master key, is generated and stored in the HSA hardware storage area of the ZBox. The data in this HSA is difficult to get access to, but it does not have the same level of protection that the secret key would have. Access to the wrapping key is much faster than the master key since no I/O to the crypto card is required, and the wrapped key is buffered so multiple uses of that same key are improved. Now that I've discussed some of the models for key protection, we'll discuss some of the facilities offered by ZOS. First, there's a software component called the Integrated Cryptographic Service Facility, or ICSF for short. ICSF provides a set of macros or services that can be called, then uses underlying features that are available to accomplish the task. Some services can be emulated in the software itself when no underlying feature is available to handle it for you. But not all of those services are available through software emulation. Underlying ICSF is a free hardware feature number 3863 called the CP Assist for Cryptographic Function, or CPACF, commonly called CPAF, but it does not get installed on processors by default. The reason that it's not automatically available is due to some export limitations. But if your box supports the feature and you live in a country where the technology is available to you, you may want to consider getting it added. The CPAF feature enables a set of high-performance message security assist crypto instructions. These instructions can be called directly from your application, so ICSF is not really required, but they only will handle symmetric encryption algorithms. If you call a symmetric function through ICSF, ICSF will also take advantage of the CPAF instructions if they're available. There are a variety of Crypto Express coprocessor cards that we were just discussing available for a fee. A coprocessor card is required if you want to use that secret key model. You can also use a Crypto Express coprocessor card in an accelerator mode. When in accelerator mode, the secret key functionality is not available, but asymmetric algorithms available on the coprocessor can be used to improve performance. This may be desirable particularly if you are hosting SSL applications that do a lot of asymmetric quick transactions. Since the key itself is not encrypted by a master key, the level of security is reduced, but the level of performance is improved since the decryption of the key doesn't have to happen before the decryption of the data. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that a crypto coprocessor is mainly used for additional security rather than for higher performance. As you can see, all the options have trade-offs. More security usually means more CPU. You have to find the right balance for your purpose. Things to consider when deciding your solution will partly revolve around the concepts we've just touched on. Is the data you're protecting worth the level of security you're protecting it with? In addition, your solution will have to be in line with what the needs are. If you simply need to protect the data while it traverses the internet, but once it reaches the other end and it's now hidden from external prying eyes, there are some good solutions just to encrypt the data in motion. If, on the other hand, you really are trying to archive some secret data, or you need to make sure that once the data reaches the destination, you need to make sure that only the people with the right credentials are going to be able to see that data, then a different solution may be in order. Something that is going to encrypt the data at rest. I'm going to turn it over to Colin now to review some of those different technologies. Then you can weigh your options and make the right choice for your needs. Colin?
Thank you, Tim, for that great overview on encryption, and good afternoon to everyone. So I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with the solutions shown on your screen. There are many different ways to secure data at your site, and I suppose it all depends on what your end goal is. Some customers prefer making use of SFTP. I'm aware of some customers that have a solution where they run the FTP off the mainframe on a distributed platform, and some folks prefer to use FTPS. There are so many different options, and the intent of today's webcast is to provide you with a good overview of the solutions available and also highlight some of the pros and cons of each solution. At the end of the webcast, hopefully you will have a better understanding of the different solutions and choose an option or maybe options that best fit your company's requirements. So let's get right to it. Okay, so this may be a very busy or confusing diagram for you to take in right now, but as we begin to discuss each option, it will become much clearer. The diagram shows all of the different options to secure data. So we are going to be covering a lot of detail pretty quickly, and chances are that you might find a need for more than one solution depending on your specific needs. FTP is a well-known common application for moving data, but it has a lot of technical baggage that makes it less than ideal for transferring data that is confidential or not really intended to be available to everyone in the world. I think the world as it existed when FTP was originally designed was a much smaller, safer world than what it is today. Unfortunately, as we all know, and as you've seen in the stats that Deb presented earlier, that just isn't the case any longer. With the advent and proliferation of the worldwide internet, the playing field has gotten much larger. It's provided us with a great wealth of opportunities. Unfortunately, few opportunities come without cost. Privacy is normally one of the first casualties of accessibility. That is, unless you are willing to implement the necessary solutions or changes to protect your data. So let's talk about some of the methods and tools commonly available to resolve the privacy problem. Each of the methods we'll be reviewing has its own set of benefits, but also it has its own sets of complications and limitations. So after a brief description of the concept, we'll have a look at the pros and cons of each solution. One thing that I think is pretty useful when investigating the different options is identifying when will be a perfect time to use or implement this solution. I plan to mention these occasions so you can relate it back to when it makes sense to apply at your site. So we'll talk about some scenarios that can best leverage the benefits of each solution. Okay, so here is what I intend to cover today. Firstly, we'll talk about good old FTP and when it is still a good time to make use of it. Then we'll move along and discuss a solution that many of you are already using by exploring the FTPS protocol and how it might be used in the right environment. We'll continue by discussing some other technologies that might make sense when you need to share data with your partners who are using a different platform like Unix, for example. This solution takes advantage of FTP over an SSH encrypted tunnel. This is a bit of a hybrid solution and provides a bridge between what's already in place and the encryption features of the SSH protocol. Then we'll move along and discuss SFTP or Secure FTP, the protocol which is an integrated part of the SSH environment. So FTP has been around for many years and is probably firmly entrenched in your site in scripts and batch jobs, and now the auditors come along and tell you to start making use of SFTP. Well, what now? So we'll revisit FTP and how you might be able to marry your FTP investment to the new requirement with a minimal of effort, so that is without all of the hassles of converting batch jobs and scripts to SFTP command syntax. Then again, data in motion might not be your only concern. Perhaps you have been mandated to secure all data, both in motion and at rest. PGP might be a good solution for you to consider, and we will discuss that as an alternative. This might be an ideal option for you to consider when you're concerned about more than just prying eyes on the internet. Okay, let's break it down and simplify. Let's start with good old FTP. One of the biggest advantages to FTP is that it is already available in so many different operating systems. ZOS, Windows, Unix, Linux, you name it, usually comes with FTP ready to go. The client side is nearly always available for use, and the server side is usually pre-installed with just a little bit of configuration required, and it will be ready for use. FTP has been around for such a long time. In fact, in my research I was surprised to learn that the original RFC for FTP dates back to April 1971. Since it's been around for such a long time and so readily available, everyone has probably had some exposure to FTP. It's pretty simple to use, follows some common prototypes that everyone is familiar with, and has nice basic syntax for the fundamentals. In addition, since it's been the de facto standard for so long and so widely exploited in your environment, in fact you probably find that in most customer sites it is firmly entrenched in day-to-day processes, that considering an alternate solution might prove to be a major undertaking. Later in this presentation we will address some of these challenges and possible solutions. FTP usually comes with appropriate extensions to make it work well on the platform that it's delivered with. And for example, the ZOS FTP server and the client handles ZOS datasets seamlessly. EBCDIC to ASCII conversion is supported, and even JS support is available for the submission of jobs and extraction of reports. One of the major flaws of FTP though is that it doesn't handle privacy and security very well. FTP is a clear text protocol. Any eavesdropper on the line can see user IDs, passwords, and the content of the data file. In a closed, secure environment, that can save a lot of hassles, but that type of inherent guarantee is more the exception than the rule in today's complex networking environments. To address these issues, lots of network precautions has been taken. For example, one is to implement a firewall. Firewalls, as you all know, are intended to let safe traffic pass while blocking suspect connections. This is a pretty good plan, but may be difficult to implement, particularly when it comes to FTP. FTP is different from most other protocols in that it has two connections, one for commands, which is the initial pathway, and the second for data when transfers are underway. Here is a diagram that provides an overview of what a standard active FTP session looks like. The client requests a connection to the server, normally called the command session, and the server opens a data connection as necessary to transfer data between the partners. The FTP protocol was designed around a trusting relationship. Both participants in the communication were oblivious to the rest of the world. But as we all know, the world is a more open and less safe place, and safety precautions had to be put into place. One approach was to place a firewall between the intranet and the internet, so those on the inside were considered to be part of the trusted network and could communicate to almost anyone they liked. But those on the outside or on the internet were not permitted to start a conversation with someone on the inside. That caused a problem for an active firewall session. So the initial command connection would work fine, but when a transfer started up, the firewall would block the new connection coming in from the outside. So FTP passive mode was introduced to help deal with the security problem. Using passive mode, the client would indicate its intention to the server. If the FTP server was configured to support passive mode, the server would start a listener on an ephemeral port, which is a dynamic port grabbed from a pool of available ports, and pass the port number to the client on the command session. The client could then initiate a second data connection, and the firewall would allow the transfer to work. Basic firewall setup worked now, but sometimes this basic setup was not as secure as might be desirable. Limiting access to the outside world can be desirable for many businesses in many cases. This could cause a problem for the second connection on the ephemeral port, which was not defined as an acceptable port to the firewall. So firewalls were enhanced to sniff the port number being passed on the command connection to provide temporary access from that host to get that data connection working. Okay, so a fix was put in place, but the problem you will see later on in this presentation might be a problem for folks that make use of FTPS. We'll get to that particular piece later in the presentation. What are some of the limitations when using native FTP? FTP did not make any concessions for improved network performance. Compression was not native to the FTP protocol. There is a Mode Z extension that is available in some implementations, but don't always count on it being available. FTP also did not provide any application level checksum to verify the integrity of the data. It relied on the TCP checksum, which provided some minimal checking, but it could be easily fooled. For example, a transposition of the bytes in a packet could provide an identical checksum, fooling the integrity check. I think that network reliability has come a long way, but it is still not flawless. If you need to know the data was transmitted accurately, FTP might not be the way to go, as it does not provide the level of confidence that you may require. FTP can still be useful when privacy and integrity are less important than easy access. For example, if the data is public knowledge and there is room for inaccuracy, FTP might make good sense. Such FTP is familiar, since FTP is familiar and already available in most cases, it can be used effectively. You may also want to use it on the intranet because it's already available and well known. But keep in mind that user IDs and passwords are easily sniffed using tools that are freely available on the internet. So in the end, far too many things are being done using FTP, and a review of what is really going on is very often the best place to start. Let's move along and discuss FTPS. FTP over SSL is very similar to native FTP. The syntax is the same, the protocol is the same, and with a bit of configuration, encryption can be added to a protocol that is widely used at customer sites today. In the ZOS arena, FTPS is already available as part of the base FTP offering you've installed. They both provide some nice ZOS specific features such as ZOS dataset support, JS support, and from a reporting point of view, you can use SMF to keep tabs of your FTP transfers for some key events. FTPS also supports X.509 certificates and Kerberos. Services from outside parties such as VeriSign, Equifax, and several other vendors can do verification work to ensure authenticity. And since the server and client were designed to work with ZOS, the use of RACF keyrings is available for the management of certificates. This sounds all very nice, and it may address all of the features and requirements you may be looking for. So you may be thinking, what is the downside to using FTPS? Well, remember earlier when we spoke about FTP and firewalls and how the workaround for passive FTP could introduce some other complexities, especially when using FTPS? Remember how the server passed the port to connect back to the server on the command connection, and how the firewall might sniff it to provide temporary dynamic access for the client? Well, now the data on the command connection is encrypted, so the firewall cannot sniff it any longer. Sounds like another interesting opportunity. Even though there are FTP servers and clients available on most platforms, you cannot necessarily assume that they will be active and configured. There may be some work required to get everything going. So when does FTPS make good sense? Perhaps in your data center between LPARs or in a sysplex would make sense to use FTP over SSL. Very seldom do you see firewalls implemented between LPARs. The I-series is commonly loaded with an FTP server and client, so that might be another good possibility. And again, it is not uncommon for the Z-series and I-series systems to live closely together in server farms, where firewalls typically do not come into play. The server and the client are generally available on server and client platforms. Okay, so that was FTPS. Let's move along and discuss using FTP with an SSH tunnel. SSH is similar technology that can also provide the confidentiality, authentication, and integrity needed all in encryption. The pros of using FTP over an SSH tunnel is that you leverage all of the FTP processes you already have in place and can take easy advantage of using the SSH encryption tunnel. The default port when using SSH is port 22, making it more firewall friendly, and the SSH tunnel only requires a single connection. The connection can carry multiple tunnels simultaneously and deals with the multiplexing, getting the right data from each tunnel to the right application. So what happens is the command connection and the data connection is multiplexed in the same SSH encrypted connection. No more secondary connections coming from the wrong side of the firewall. SSH also compresses the data as it encrypts it, so you can get the benefit of reduced bandwidth. Of course, the security and savings of bandwidth comes at a cost of CPU, but if you have a crypto processor, you might be able to offload it to that. Some technologies as well do take advantage of the ZAPs and ZIPs and the IFL processor too. SSH also has a more sophisticated checksum process that is less likely to be fooled, so you can have more confidence that the network won't corrupt the data without you knowing about it. This could be a very good solution, but it does usually require some coordination between the partners to make sure that all of the technical pieces are in place. Another downside is that both FTP and SSH are required on both ends. FTP clients are usually there, but servers may not. Linux and Unix administrators have come to rely on SSH and its SFTP subsystem to move files around. They regularly do not have an FTP server running. First, there might not have been any need for it before, and secondly, FTP would require another port to be opened up. That opens up another potential exposure to an intruder. This can be a great solution to consider if all of the pieces are in place. You can leverage that which is already implemented in your environment with little to no modifications of ZOS batch jobs. You may get some resistance when having to enable a back-end FTP server on your partner's platform. So the best option for you may be to implement a vanilla SFTP transfer. Point-to-point encryption is not unique to SFTP. In fact, using FTPS and FTP via an SSH tunnel provides encryption from the client to the server. Let's be clear on SFTP. It is not the encryption engine. It's a subsystem of the SSH server. It's the SSH component that is responsible for the encryption. SSH can encrypt lots of different kinds of traffic, including telnet, file transfers, and just about any kind of TCP traffic you want. SFTP simply is the add-on that makes file transfers more convenient to run through the SSH tunnel. Since SFTP is using SSH and SSH is already providing the compression and integrity checking inherent in encryption, SFTP is able to take full advantage of both. One of the biggest advantages of SFTP is that it is semi-ubiquitous. Why semi-ubiquitous, you may ask? Well, that is because it's almost always available on Unix and Linux platforms, but not so much on the ZOS and Windows platforms. You'll generally have to install something on these platforms to add the support. I'm sure that you are aware that there are free solutions available and also solutions that you have to pay for. The free solutions will provide you with some of the functionality and support you require, but there are usually some significant limitations involved. For example, base SFTP does not provide EBCDIC to ASCII translation. Some of the SSH offerings available for ZOS have extensions to add most of this support. However, in addition to access to ZOS datasets, the JSQ and other ZOS specific features are usually features that most customers do require. Also, the ability to offload encryption to the crypto processor is another feature that may be important. Fortunately, these are available for a fee solutions, so you will want to review what your needs are before deciding on the right solution for your environment. One thing to be aware of is that SFTP command syntax is similar but not the same as FTP, so there is a bit of training and re-educating required. The solutions we discussed so far are designed to protect your data while in transit between sites, but once it reaches the other end, the data is unsecured and it could still be a security exposure as far as your auditors are concerned. Later in this presentation, we will be talking about a solution that is designed to protect data not just in transit but at rest. SFTP may be a great solution if you're interested in disseminating data to your Linux farm or your partners are using Linux or Unix. Quite often we hear from customers that they have been told to stop using FTP and start using SFTP, and that's about the only direction they've been given. If the real goal is encryption, any of the previous solutions discussed should suffice, other than plain old FTP, that is. If the goal truly is to implement SFTP, then this solution might be the one that is of interest to you. However, there might be another solution that will prevent or will help making the conversion from FTP to SFTP a little bit more painless. There are vendor SSH solutions that make it easy to build the bridge to ease the FTP to SFTP conversion. It involves an FTP to SFTP proxy, so the FTP commands get routed to this proxy and they're converted from FTP commands to SFTP commands, allowing you to communicate with your partner's SSH SFTP server natively. The network portion is SFTP. On the ZOS side, your client jobs are really still using FTP. You will still need to modify batch FTP job steps to use the proxy. This can be done with a simple JCL modification, and I'm also aware of tools that can make this JCL changes for you. FTP and SFTP are not 100% compatible, so be aware that there may be changes required for you to get everything working correctly. But basic FTP functions generally make the transition pretty easy. So if you have a big investment in FTP in place and a conversion to native SFTP will be a major undertaking, then this might be the best solution for you to consider. Okay, so data in motion might not be your only concern. Other options exist outside of encrypting data in transit, and PGP or Pretty Good Privacy provides the ability to secure data at rest. It's different than all of the other solutions we discussed so far, and can be a really good option, particularly when the data involved is highly confidential. So if you pre-encrypt the data, not only will it be protected in transit, but it will also be protected at the destination. Only those with the proper credentials can extract the data. Since encryption is already handled, any transport will do. As a matter of fact, good old FTP might be a good choice again. If you go that route, though, remember that the authentication of the FTP control session would still be in plain text. But since the data is already encrypted and can be protected by access at the other end by requiring the proper credentials after the transfer, an anonymous FTP session can be used to safely transfer the data and still protect it from prying eyes anywhere along its path. PGP also provides the compression and integrity that can be so important, particularly in those really large files. But the other thing you might consider is that PGP isn't just for network transfers. It can be used even if the data doesn't move at all. For example, you might encrypt the file for archival and delete the original. Just make sure you keep track of the necessary credentials to decrypt the file, or you might be in a little trouble later when you need to get the data back. I'm not sure if this is much of a con, but the data does need to go through a bit of staging. I think though once you've introduced it into your batch jobs and processes, that step can be as transparent as anything else. So I mentioned this can be a really good solution when you're concerned about more than just prying eyes on the internet. PGP can be useful for encryption even when network transfers aren't involved. But in some cases the network is involved, but controlling the network is outside your domain. Firewall admins can sometimes be a little finicky about allowing traffic they're not comfortable with, or they might have other tasks that are of a higher priority than yours, well, at least in their eyes. Since PGP can be used over any transport, you can take back control of your data. Okay, so hopefully this diagram is not as confusing anymore. We discussed lots of possibilities, and the reality is that it's not that likely that any one of these solutions will solve all of your needs. You'll probably come up with a mixture of different solutions. Finding the right technical partners to help identify the problem and what solution fits your specific puzzle can best can save you lots of time and your company lots of money. So in summary, ask yourself, what is the problem you are trying to solve? Do your homework and research the different options. Choose the option or options that make most sense and implement it in your environment. And one thing is very key is once you've implemented a solution, conduct regular audits to make sure that you're still compliant and that all of your data is secured. So thank you everyone for taking time out to attend this webcast today. I'm going to hand it back to Gwen to field some of the questions that has come in. Gwen, back to you.